all you need is love is a maddening and frustrating statement, because while profound and true, it's extraordinarily vague. What is meant by love? What is love? Can we take this word, this concept, and can we find that which is the common denominator to all uses of the word love? That would be a very Platonic project. Love is a paradox, and the Lovers is a card about paradox. I mean, here you have a card that's the sixth card of the major arcana, and as we both know, my conscious and my unconscious sides, and me and everyone else, as we all know, 6 is the Magen Star, or the Star of David, right? So it gives us this figure of a descending and an ascending triangle that have been interlaced. And if you have been following my course, if you've recently watched the video where I showed with the Chariot the use of Abrahadabra as a talisman, you already have a very clear example of a duality that involves two triangles, a masculine and a feminine triangle, or the triangle of manifestation and the triangle of counter manifestation, which have emerged out of the work of the Chariot. And remember, there's this chain, right? So like the Chariot is 7, but its letter is 8. The Lovers is a 6, but its letter is 7. And up here in the upper worlds of the tree, these realities are very these links of the chain, these crossover or overlaps, these cascade points are quite clear. They're much more obvious. So the Lovers is the 6th card, and we have the harmony of opposites. We have a reference to Tippereth, actually. Let me just grab my Tree of Life diagram. That was the last thing luckily I believe I know where it is. There it is. Right. So Tippereth, beauty, is 6. It's the center of the tree. It touches all of the sphere, the Sephiroth, except for Malkuth. And it is symbolized by the Magen Star. We are now connecting here. I know this says the Chariot, but because of the proximized tree, the Lovers are connecting here. And Zayin, the letter assigned to the Lovers, actually means weapon, spear, or sword, which is very interesting. It's a divisive tool, a tool of penetration, a tool of division, and that turns out to be a lot of what's going on here. Is there's a threshold with the Lovers where there are two different things, and there are two different beings. There's a profound separation, and there's a negotiation of terms, a negotiation of return, and there's both a theme of alienation and return in this. And as we'll see, there's a whole ton going on in the Lovers. The Lovers is possibly one of the most variously depicted of all the tarot trumps. So in grab Marseille here. So let's just do a little survey of some of the different images that we get here, and then we'll discuss it. So first and foremost, we have earliest one that I've got is this one here, which is the Cariel Visconti, and this is an original work. This is a very unusual depiction of the Lovers. It is a marriage. You notice we have 3 terms here. We have the angel, the cherub. We have the the male and the female, the man and the woman, and actually 4 terms. We have the little white dog. And look, this is basically the same little white dog that's been showing up in every tarot since. So I would be inclined to put the interpretation that the little white dog is the god that goes unnoticed, right? It's God spelled backwards. And also it's always witness to, or fifth business to, this scene unfolding, especially with the Fool. And it seems to represent the divine going unnoticed and yet manifesting in mundane matters. So here we have a sanctioning of the wedding by the presence of this dog. So there's a tetragrammaton here, right? So there's 4 levels, 4 worlds, Atziluth, Bariah, Yetzirah, and Asaya, and of course there's this central pillar or axis mundi where they're shaking hands. And some have mentioned that this feels like a business deal more than anything else, which, if you can imagine in Renaissance Italy, marriages between great families, well, they kind of were business deals. So here we have alliance between 2 families. There's been a lot of research done into this, and I'm not a historian of art in the same way that many may be able to speak to this. So I can just say sort of my impressions from an aesthetic point of view and a semiotic point of view. But there's research to be done. Like, who are these people? Because Visconti Sforza decks are, they're personalized, right? There's not a lot of these being made. Beneficio Bembo, whose workshop produced these, was clearly commissioned to do this. Almost certainly these were real people with real names, and it represented an actual event. And this deck was likely given as a gift. Okay. So, that's not what I was looking for. Okay. So we have this initial theme of a wedding, and actually we see something similar here in the Carrie Yale. This is also pretty much the same kind of idea, but it's even more like a business deal. And there's no tent, and there's no axis mundi, and there's no little white dog. There appears to be a pillar and a fountain. Unfortunately, this card has been really badly damaged, so the gold gilting came off. And whenever I read with this deck and this card comes up, people often think it's a really negative thing because they see the bloody baby, right? But it's not that at all. It's a damaged work of art. Now, as many of you already know, the gap in time between the Visconti Sforza decks and the Marseille is significant. It's a significant interval. So the Marseille decks, which are produced with a printing press and include numbers and names, they emerge, I think, 100, 200 years later. They have obviously an engraved style. Here's an example, and we have a very different theme for the lovers. In this card, what we seem to see is a cherub again, but this is a suitor deciding between 2 possible lovers. So this is a male gaze centric version of the lovers, and this is something Rachel Pollack points out and even calls it juvenile. And it's a picture of this fellow deciding between the woman, between the more, how do I put this? Basically, there's a woman who's portrayed as beautiful, and there's a woman who's portrayed as ugly, and the suitor is choosing between them, and he's torn because there's qualities that the woman portrayed as ugly has that the woman portrayed as beautiful does not, and vice versa. So you can see the hand gesture. His hand is moving towards this woman, but his eyes are towards this woman. This woman is holding his attention in terms of her speech and her mind, and this woman is holding his attention in terms of her body, presumably. So here is the paradox of the lovers, depicted as the difficulty of choosing between the beautiful mind and the beautiful body. And if you think about it, I mean, Rachel Pollack's fairly right, because there's nothing to say that this is not the richest version of the lovers. It is what's been called choices. I believe one of the earliest names of this card was choices. And so we're not even really talking about love as we understand it, but rather decision making, which makes sense when you're thinking about Gemini and Zayin. But the Marseille deck, they didn't have these attributions to our knowledge. They were not that stuff. The Kabbalistic marriage is way later than these cards, right? So the Kabbalistic, which is like a lover's relationship too, right? The Kabbalistic hybridization with the tarot comes about right in the 19th century, but this is a pretty classic image of this sort of tension, this dilemma. But it's not of two people coming together. It's of choosing who to have an encounter with. So it's really about the communication and the encounters, which makes a lot of sense when you're taking Zayin, which is Gemini. So I mean, the Kabbalistic fusion still actually makes quite a bit of sense. But isn't it strange to have a card called the Lovers, which is more than anything seems to be about very rationalistic ideas, and in particular dialectics. So I said a little bit about the Chariot as a figure of double articulation. It's got two simultaneous strategies at once. And remember when we were talking about the balance, justice. Justice is three principles, but one of them has been paralyzed, right? So the pivot and two pans. The wheel is three principles, and they're all in motion. The Chariot seems to be three principles as well, but that third one is kind of assumed into the body. The crab. It's the intelligence of this. It's hidden behind it. But here again we have an explicit third, but that third is immobile, and we see. We see, here's an interesting thing. Look at the direction of the arrow. So in this one, the arrow, the Cupid is not blind, and the arrow is pointing towards the attractive woman. In this one, Cupid is blind, and there may even be two spears or arrows that he holds. It's kind of hard to tell. And in this one, again, it looks like he's got two, one for each. So isn't that interesting? But of course, in these two, we don't have the same kind of choice between opposites. Okay, so what is the dialectic? The dialectic is a term given to a reasoning procedure that originally emerged in Athens through the Socratic school, and basically Socrates proceeded through question and answer. People would come to Socrates thinking they knew stuff about, say, justice. Maybe it's a lawyer, and Socrates would ask them questions, and they would answer, and they would realize they don't know anything about justice. And, like the lawyer comes in and he's like, wow, and he starts giving examples. And then basically Socrates kept appealing to universal definition. But that's, treating people fairly is an instance of justice, but I want to know what justice is in itself. And on and on and on. This is an interesting technique. And we could assume that this technique actually emerged in Greece for a reason. And I'm going to put a Marshall McLuhan type spin here. And I'm going to say, well, here we have the first generation to really be universally educated in an alphabet that contains all the vowels and everything, so that something can be written down and something can be picked back up and the letters don't mean anything, and it's just essentially an abstract code for transmitting information. So the world is out there, the meaning sphere is in here, and our words are a collection of fragments which we unify. But what unifies them? See, in a pictographic script, or even in Hebrew, there is a kind of a unity immanent to the word itself. But in the Greek, because the meanings have been expunged, there's the unity is missing. So the Greeks are looking for a lost unity, a general definition. So in a way, the relationship of instance versus general category, which Socrates is pursuing by asking questions. What is justice? Oh, no, well, being fair is an instance of justice. Being unfair is an instance of injustice, but they're not really the thing in itself, the actual thing that justice is, and you go looking for further and further transcendental existence of it. So basically, justice ends up being supposed as a transcendental existent, using the dialectic to basically scale up the ladder of abstraction. There's been evidence to show that the gematria procedure is actually not originally Jewish, and that it was practiced first in the Greek alphabet. Why is this relevant? Because, see, this procedure of proposing a transcendental has everything to do with the Greek interest in the tension between apeiron, or formlessness, and peras, or form, or limit. So the Greeks were into limit, and into correct limit, and into harmonious limit. And so the letters limit what can be. The definition, the universal definition, in a way, freezes the phenomenon, creates a kind of a form, or a stasis to the idea that exists beyond the phenomenal world. And of course, Parmenides, a great philosopher, who said that there is the path of being and the path of non-being, and being is and non-being is not, therefore there is only being. That's the argument. Being is a giant sphere. So all things which change is an illusion. There's no change, there's actually just being. But we have to find it, and we have to ascend through the dialectic. The emanation schemes that eventually emerged out of dialectics and of the Platonic school, particularly the later Platonists like Plotinus, Proclus, Iamblichus, who were really building the scaffolding for ceremonial magic, they influenced this diagram. This is very much this idea, this Jacob's ladder, is very related to the scaling up of this series of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And that's actually what Hegel, the great dialectician, proposed, is that basically the universe is spirit exploring itself by creating an other, and then synthesis, then developing a synthesis. So it would be thesis is the spirit, antithesis is matter, and then the synthesis presumably would be mind. But then synthesis becomes the first term of another series, so it becomes a thesis. As soon as it's formed, it never abides in the third position. It immediately becomes the thesis, and the antithesis is body, and so on. And so everything gets essentially generated rationalistically by Hegel through this dialectic. So it's really about otherings, rational engine of othering. As we move on, we have this Italian deck. This is basically the same type of theme. I'm just going to go in a kind of an order here. Here we have the Rider-Waite. Now, Waite comes in with something totally different, which is the Garden of Eden. How is this? I mean, and yet, this is the original couple. These are the original lovers. This feels more like lovers than choices, although, hey, choices are here. Look, there's the serpent. There's, the tree of life. And we're going to talk about the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. And here's the angel. So the third term above it, and the holy mountain. And so here we have the Edenic state. And the Edenic state is the state prior to the fall. And so in the myth of the Garden of Eden, so you have this primordial couple who are living in... they're living without clothes, which is to say they're not armored. They don't have shells on, right? Clothes are our shells. They are without shell, living in this space of connection, and they're naming things, but they're not employing dialectic. They're not ranking them. This comes later. The warning is to not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So in the center of the garden is the tree of life. And if they eat of the tree of life, they will live forever. If they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and but do believe that while it may not be in the text itself of Genesis, it's a part of the oral tradition. The tree of knowledge is actually on the periphery. So if you imagine a point, that's the tree of life, and you imagine the perimeter, that's where you find the tree of knowledge. So the infinite, limitless point is eternal, but the threshold between outside and inside is where life and death occur. So the serpent, and serpents always represent change and metamorphosis, right? And danger as well. Both venom and medicine. So the serpent tempts Eve with the fruit of this tree. The idea that it's an apple came later, and so Kabbalistically, this is like wisdom and understanding, and at a certain point, understanding takes on a reification process where understanding comes up with concepts and reifies them, puts shells on them, and then develops a kind of materialistic or mechanistic representational theater, where previously there had been this kind of space of flow, the tree of life. And so what this appears to be talking about is the fall myth appears to be talking about the trauma of language acquisition. I mean, we can read it literally, but that's beside the point. As a text, as a record of important human experience, it appears to be conveying this threshold experience of the acquisition of letters, of literacy, and how that development led to nominalization, othering, in a way that eventually descended into the creation of illusion and suffering and death, in the sense of the suffering of loss. Because when you cling to identity, when you grasp to the form, you will suffer with its loss. And so here's where bringing in the fact that this card is polar opposite with the devil is very important, because the devil figure here, the devil card, is is a very similar aesthetic layout. You've got these two demons, right? This is the tail on fire, the tree of life's flames, and then the tail is grapes, implying wine or inebriation, and then you have the devil himself, who's in this case, whose nether regions appear to be a vortex. It's like, that's kind of crazy. We don't need to go into too much detail about the devil because we've covered that. But the point here is that these are an Athbash pair, and they have profound aesthetic similarity. Winged figure. This is a relation to the other that views the other as a means to an end. This is the other as object. And this is the other as a end in themselves. I'm using Kantian language, but this is the other as subject. So in this relationship, energy is always lost. There is a entropic, when the other is an object, whether that other is a thing like this or a person, the relationship, there's an energy loss. When the other is a end in themselves, you're no longer superimposing a plan on them as such, but negotiating a territory whose tensions will take you towards neg-entropy. Remember, going upstream like the salmon, returning to the source, creating a bi-directional momentum of existence. So the manifestation and the counter-manifestation happening at the same time, which creates total presence. That is the Garden of Eden. And so, here's this incredibly insightful recipe for how we can return to that state of being on the cusp of the threshold of becoming itself. And instead of being kind of distance from it in these passive filters, these shells, these cliff-off, right? We can actually break through them and come out and peer out past the blinders and sustain this space. And of course, sustaining this space is very difficult. The Garden of Eden decays into the alienated state. It has a vector. So what is it that keeps us in this horizon? And I'm going to say that it is, it's love. So here's coming back to this starting point. It's not, we can define love as that which keeps us on the threshold of authenticity completely. And that's the Garden of Eden. Tikkun means repair. And basically the Kabbalistic, in proper Kabbalah, what we're doing is we're seeking to repair the vessels, or repair the garment, or repair the broken state. So there's a concept called Tzimtzum, and this is Lurianic Kabbalah. The Ein Sof, which is it's neither being nor non-being. It is all potentiality, the openly lucent field, the Tao. And the myth goes that it retracted from itself and it left a hole. And into that hole it shone beams of light, and they were meant to form Adam Kadmon, the universal, primordial human being. But the vessels broke and the sparks were lost, and there was an alienation that we have yet to fully recover from. And so imagine this, we develop the letters. The letters start filtering our minds into things, and then we get hypnotized by that fragmentation effect, and we end up alienated and in all these kind of dialectic relationships of othering and of striving and of grasping and of suffering. So what's the solution to it? It's basically to recover wisdom, which is the fluid quantity that will heal the broken vessels. And I want to put out, I want to draw, because I'm a syncretist, right? I want to draw from another culture at this point, which is kintsugi. Japanese kintsugi is the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. And to me, there's no greater image for my understanding of what it means to repair a vessel. So what is a vessel? It's our ability to receive something, right? These cups here are vessels. This cup here is a vessel. If it's broken, I can't use it. Words are vessels. Ideas are vessels. The total understanding is a vessel. If that's broken by ignorance, then we cannot receive wisdom. So the Kabbalah involves the process of gathering knowledge together, right? Dath, putting it together so that we can gradually repair these states of non-dual perception, and we can recover from dualism. That's really the message, is recovery from dualism and the illusion of dualism. And so I like the idea of kintsugi, even though it's been mentioned that, you know, even separating the vessels from that which they contain may be a dualistic concept. If we allow for this kind of double articulation, this intensity, this unity of a tense double, so lights and vessels can be understood as a double articulation rather than as a dualism, and the lovers can be understood as a double articulation rather than as a dualism. Here we have a dualism, here we have a double articulation. So we can sustain this through love, and then what that does is that creates negentropy, complexity. So, we have relationships with other people. Once we once we've had enough experiences to know that the media portrayal of love and this, all the stuff that we get about love and relationships and so on marketed to us falls short of what real relationships are actually like. They involve negotiation, they involve tensions, they involve moments where you really kind of don't like the other person, but you were there and you're holding the same, the same course, and then you work that out, and there's a tension. You're spinning around one another, and sometimes you come together and kiss, and sometimes you spin, and you don't merge into a giant fucking amorphous form like Akira, right? Like some, you don't, you don't merge in a way where you lose your identity in the other, but you acquire an envelope that is the resonance. It's the resonance of a crude harmony, working together, solving these problems, staying at the horizon of the authentic. Love. And so love is the negentropic return to the source with another person. And maybe that's not a partner in a romantic sense. Maybe that's a brother or a sister or a business partner. It's a productive upward spiral. And so you can see this as basically a sphere in which there's a vortex upwards, there's an upward spiral, and there's a downward spiral. And the upward spiral gains complexity for every gyre, and the downward spiral loses complexity for every gyre. I'm reminded of the 9 of discs in the microcosm, right? You've got the snail spiral, and then you've got the falcon spiral, and then you've got this center point of the woman in the garden. There's, some more repetition, themes layered coming through. Again, now you're beginning to see why I like this deck so much. So let's look at a couple more. Tarot of the Holy Lights, super alchemical. The sun and the moon. I can't speak too much to it because really this author has a very different system from what I'm used to, and I'm appreciating it and I'm looking at it, but I'm kind of not conversant in the system itself to make authoritative statements about this. But this is a different. This is a super alchemical theme, and it's assigned to Taurus, and I have yet to work out how Taurus is the lovers. But anyway, I show you this. I mean, it would make more sense in the conventional idea. I mean, I'm a Taurus, right? You know, we're into aesthetics, we're into romance, all that kind of stuff. So I can get that. In some ways, it makes more sense than Gemini. How on earth is Gemini the lovers, right? But I spend a lot more time with the Golden Dawn Descendant system than I have with the Tarot of the Holy Light, so I can only speak to what I know. Here we have Leonora Carrington's, of course. I love these guys. I feel like Tim Burton must really owe a debt to Leonora Carrington, or even this is really seems to be that issue of it's like the Marseille, the choices thing. But man, I mean, they look like they're out of the Mos Eisley Cantina in some cases. It's fantastic. Or Jabba's Palace. Sorry, making Star Wars jokes is sort of anachronistic, I suppose, for a spiritual talk. But everything is spiritual. And so here we have these images that are weird and interesting. I love it. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Okay. Ooh, what are we gonna do? So as you may have guessed, this is a bit of a complex card for me to discuss, and I've got a lot of things I want to talk about. I'll briefly show you. I haven't showed a lot of my art, but this is one that I made, and this is of a place called West Champneys in Newfoundland. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I went to a wedding there, and I just got this image of a couple in a boat rowing, right? And like I said, this idea of spinning, of finding the rhythm, of working together to create distance, and fishing in the bay and going to the wedding, climbing Fox Mountain, and all that. West Champneys is amazing. So that's a little kind of personal. Here we have Elise Ursa's Blood and Ink, very raw, with the image of the lovers, and the image of the hearts is very clear. And you see 3 hearts here, and the arrow coming in. So super intense. Yeah, a lovely deck. So, yeah, before I get to Aleister Crowley's, which is my favorite card in his Thoth deck, without shadow of a doubt. But before I get to it, I want to show you the lovers in the Hermetic deck, because this actually is a theme. This is another completely different theme for the lovers, and we see this in the Golden Dawn deck and in the Hermetic deck. So it's actually Perseus saving Andromeda from Cetus, the sea monster. And so let's talk a bit about this story, because it's complex. So Cassiopeia, the Vain Queen, these are all constellations. This is like most of the northern sky. Cassiopeia, the Vain Queen, brags about her beauty. Hera, the spouse of Zeus, and doesn't really love braggarts, so she decides to beset Cassiopeia, whose husband, by the way, is Cepheus, the king, and besets Cassiopeia, besets the whole kingdom with this sea monster called Cetus that comes and harries their coast and eats their ships. And the only way to appease this monster is to sacrifice their daughter, or sacrifice presumably virgins on the rock, and then one day it becomes the daughter. I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but it's been a long time since I've read that. But as I have had it transmitted in its oral form to me, it is basically a scene in which Andromeda, the daughter, has been chained up to a rock in the sea, and the monster is going to come and eat her. Okay, so what do we interpret this as? Is this an image of the idea of love or desire as a devouring force, right? The my desire for love may have me consume another person. This almost possessive kind of monstrous type of love energy. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, the Cetus here is depicted in a way that's quite phallic, so this could be overweening lust, if you will. And who is Perseus? Perseus is a hero, and Perseus has just come back. He's just flying in from slaying the Gorgon Medusa. This is so loaded, right? Okay, so what are the Greeks doing with their alphabet? We've discussed this already. They're freezing change. They are implying the principle of identity into the core of reality. They don't like zero at all. If you divide by zero, it smashes the system. Look it up. Division by zero does not equal infinity, and it does not equal one, and it does not equal zero. It equals cannot compute. The system cannot handle division by zero. It's a paradox. The Greeks really don't like this. That's a pyrrhon. They want paras. They want a dialectical system that they can they can maneuver within, not a amorphous kind of blending into everything and loss of form and definition. So there is a tradition that change itself is irreducible, and the Heraclitean idea you can't step into the same river twice. There is submerged within the Western tradition a change primary tradition, and I would go so far as to say that probably Thelema it goes back. I think it goes back into antiquity in some form or another, and it may be preserving that kind of concept of the primary paradox, right? Not the primary. The universe's primary state is not a emotionless point. It's a plenum of self-different emergence, or in the non-emanationist Kabbalah of David James Smith, an open, lucent field of creative expression. Right, but the Greeks don't like that. And the Greeks want to measure things, and they're using their alphabet to do it, right? So the Greek alphabet's myth is the King Cadmus, who sewed dragon's teeth, and they became soldiers. The dragon's teeth are the letters, and at the end of the battle, there's 5 left standing, and those are the vowels, because they coded the vowels. Hebrew did not code the vowels, and so the Greeks hermetically sealed language in order to stave off change. So who's Medusa? Medusa, like say Tiamat, another dragon, right? A incredibly powerful feminine force, which is fundamentally writhing and moving. Serpentine, we talked about the serpent, right? Change, death, and has the ability to freeze you by looking at you, turning you into stone. Paralysis, right? Petrification. And so isn't that interesting? We become static in the face of primordial change, and we become dynamic in the face of primordial stasis. Isn't that a strange dualism for human beings, right? So we get our dynamism by freezing the field. And so this is what Perseus is doing. Perseus comes in with a mirror, right? Everyone else is getting turned to stone, but Perseus uses a mirrored shield, which I believe comes from Athena. Awesome. Athena, supplier of wisdom weapons. And anyway, this shield, he's able to look at and see the reflection of the primordial flux rather than its actual nature. So he's able to make a concept of it. And so he's able basically to behead Medusa, which is to say, to take change from its context of having the ability to, to maneuver into. He captures it, he turns it into an object. He turns change itself into an object. He gets her head, and contemporary feminism obviously has going to have a lot to say about that, and I will encourage that. I don't want to valorize the idea of the Greek fantasy of pinning everything down into a static field. I really don't. But that's the myth here, and so Perseus has his head. Now what happens? The foam of the blood falls down into the sea foam and it becomes Pegasus. So he gets a horse out of the deal. So the head has been separated. This concept of change that is now something he can wield as a weapon has been acquired, and the residue, the overflow, turns into something that he can use for transport. In this killing of primordial change, and really we can compare this to Marduk and Tiamat. I don't have time to talk about it, but it's in the Enuma Elish. Marduk fights Tiamat with a bellows, blows an evil wind into, that's how it was translated, blows a wind into the body of this dragon, paralyzes it and splits it into two. Opens like a clamshell, makes the heaven, makes the earth, uses the blood and the sinews to create the calendar. Okay, so primordial chaos is parsed into a cogniform, a thinkable environment. I would say this is all about cogniforming, which is taking the unthinkable domains of immediacy and making them thinkable, populating them with concepts. And to get there, we need stories to just provide us with the kind of the means of producing and also of remembering these concepts. So the myths are the kind of bridge to the production of concepts. And they go both ways, right? We can use them from the concepts to go back to the primordial state, or from the primordial state to produce the concepts. And so this is starting to sound a lot more like the same idea of the Tzimtzum, right? So language acquisition is traumatic. Tikkun restores us to the Edenic state, but by moving forward, moving beyond language. So we don't fall back. We don't become mad and incapable of using language. We move forward. Here's a thing that Deleuze and Guattari wrote in A Thousand Plateaus, which really actually bears upon this particular issue. This is the opening line of A Thousand Plateaus, and this is a difference primary philosophy. This is championing the idea of a primary difference, right? The two of us, so there's two people who wrote this series of books. Anti-Oedipus was the first, and A Thousand Plateaus was the second. It's called Capitalism and Schizophrenia, is the name of the series. Very, very intense. The two of us wrote Anti-Oedipus together. Since each of us was several, there was already quite a crowd. Here we have made use of everything that came within range, what was closest as well as farthest away. We have assigned clever pseudonyms to prevent recognition. We have kept our own. Why have we kept our own names? Out of habit, purely out of habit, to make ourselves unrecognizable in turn, to render imperceptible not ourselves, but what makes us act, feel, and think. And also because it's nice to talk like everybody else, to say the sun rises when everybody knows it's only a matter of speaking, to reach not the point where one no longer says I, but the point where it is no longer of any importance whether one says I. We are no longer ourselves. Each will know his own. We have been aided, inspired, multiplied. So this is the transcendence of dualism, not falling back into a naive relativism, a naive multiplicity, like Cratylus has said, the philosopher, Heraclitean philosopher, who's sort of, defeated by Socrates, is said to have been basically at the end of his life no longer able to talk and just sit in a cave wagging his finger, right? And this is a cautionary tale. This is Plato's cave, right? Cratylus is in there going, Deleuze, of course, says, well, you got to go to the back of the cave and look behind the curtain. You'll find more and more and more and more caves. I say you go back to the back of the cave, pull aside the curtain. What you'll see is the star field, infinite space. And the body of Nuit is at the back of the cave, and we've been going out through, the solar exit, but there's a stellar exit behind the curtain. If you will follow the Platonic analogy, right, upon which the shadows. Don't think that is a flat surface. There's something behind it. You should look. Right. So here comes Perseus, and on the residue of Medusa, holding her head, and he flies in an Andromeda, who is this woman about to be seized by this monster libido snake beast. And what does he do? He uses the concept to freeze Cetus. He paralyzes the monster. And so we have basically the formation of self-control. We have the concept being used to, reason being used to stem appetite. And the lesson presumably here is that the lover is one who, in the desire for this kind of this dialectic, this harmonic movement towards negentropy or even syntropy, has sacrificed their first order desire. So this is like the development of the ego, right? From the id to the ego, and then beyond that. So that's an interesting thing. And I don't mean ego as in, egoism, but like that filter of self that makes decisions. So we have all these elements, right? The formation of, a concept of self and other, and the redemption of a crisis state. So you can see how all these concepts are interrelated. Language, the dialectic, the way that we create others, the other as end versus the other as means. So we're in a place where we're treating the other as an end, right? So if Perseus was, the Cetus is basically treating the other as a means, and then Perseus is no, we're gonna rescue her. Again, it's obviously a patriarchal myth, but it is rich, very, very rich myth. Okay, so I want to just dip back into a discussion of the two trees of the Garden of Eden. So this is the tree of life as we're very familiar with it. This is, however, it's been suggested that we might want to view this not as the tree of life, but as the tree of knowledge. Why? Because Dath is here, right? Dath is the knowledge point that suggests this descended, basically, Malkuth as the material pendant to the whole, doesn't touch Tippereth, right? We don't have direct knowledge of the world, right? Like the skeptic's argument. How can you know there's a world when you only have to perceive it through the senses? Well, we have to assume it because of consistency over time. If you don't assume that there's a common space or a common world, you end up in a type of relativism that is pathological. But if you go all the way, actually, and you say, well, I cannot assume the existence of an external world, nor can I assume the existence of an internal world, then you bypass the problem. Then you no longer have that problem. That's only a problem if you're like, I don't believe in an outside world, but I'm still real. That's called solipsism, and it's basically like, welcome to the fun house. Someone takes on solipsism, they're basically 9 times out of 10 going to behave like an asshole. But if that movement is applied both ways, then okay, I say the world is an illusion because I can't prove that there's an external world, but I can't prove there's an internal world either. Therefore, it's an illusion, but it's real anyways. So illusion and reality, then, when you go consistent, it all collapses into this. Yeah. Eden. So this is the tree of knowledge with the supernal reality is basically alienated from the mind has yet to bridge with supernal reality. And this is called the Gra tree. This is symmetrical, and you can see the center column has been pushed right up, and this is the unfallen tree. This is the tree of life. This is what's in the center. This is the tree of knowledge. This is what's on the outside. So the objective is to attain this and this simultaneously. To be able to have this double articulated awareness of the descended state and the ascended state at the same time. The great paradox. And then we're getting into places where you can talk about singularity and generality in the same breath. So we are getting into the paradox of love, right? The horizon of creation. Nobody's saying that, once you ascend, all your you're completely self-sacrificial kind of thing. And people can poke you in the eye, and you're not allowed to swat them out of the way because that would be unspiritual. Nobody's saying that. You defend your ground, right? The chariot's interesting because the chariot, I recently read someone who interpreted the chariot as this protective field against the limitless light, which to my mind is actually not. It's not. He's emphasizing the fence, right? Chet as a fence, but Chet is a field that has contours, has a border. But actually, that fence in the field is all the limitless light, right? So the chariot, in my understanding, is not to defend against Apiron. It's to return to it, but with beauty. So that's, to make the, and here's another idea, and this one works really well with the proximized tree, the fact that the lovers is running between chesed, or gevurah, and bina, right? So understanding and severity, and this is sometimes called din. And this is the place, right? Remember we talked about 5, right? 5 shows up in the middle of the low shoe, shows up in the middle of the 19, the order 4 hexagonal. So 5 has this pivotal role. It's a very human number. It is where we take a stand. We say there's an other. Okay, here's our barrier, and it's where the shells form. It's where the tzimtzum happens, but it's also where it's undone. It's where that shell is made from the opaque state of saying, we're protecting this interval and everything outside of it is nullified, to we're holding this interval and affirming everything outside of it, and the clear light passes through, and we cannot rationally defend it, but we can still defend those perimeters. We can still hold those spaces, right? Someone comes in and attacks you, you can still fight to save your life. Nobody's saying, of course, that there's this like loss of definition in the holy. There isn't. That's the thing, right? Is we lose all of the borders and we retain all of the contours. So, and to me, that's love, right? Yeah, I think I've said most of what I wanted to, basically we're talking about like encountering the other without collapsing into them, and without with the other. This is what I wrote. And I'll leave on this. I think this is a great way to leave on this. Except that I gotta talk about this. I gotta talk about Crowley, and then I'll read this last bit. So Crowley's got a vision that incorporates pretty much most of these stories, right? You've got the swords, you've got the beautiful curvy woman and the muscular woman, so the kind of the polarization of desire, because obviously, there's a physical desire, and this is almost this weird idea that the physical desire contains a intellectual revulsion, and the intellectual desire contains a physical revulsion, like they're part of a yin-yang dyad. We have this figure in the background. I think he said something about the mark of Cain in the book, and I didn't really get it, but this is an Ancient of Days type figure. But ancient, the mark of, he's talking about Cain and Abel here. Black and white. I know that there's a racist history to this. So the idea that the mark of Cain is being black, it has, I believe, been circulated in certain circles. That's fucking racist bullshit. But he's got two brothers, a white and a black. A black father, a white mother. He's got, this is interesting, he's got the lion and the eagle, red and white, right, the alchemical drops, and they're counterchanged from their colors in the art card. And he really draws a lot of attention to the relationship with the art card. I haven't brought the art card out. He says that this is the marriage, and the art card is the consummation of the marriage. But here's his devil, if you recall. So again, some similarity in the symmetries involved here. The horns of the dilemma, right? There's dilemmas here, dilemmas and paradoxes. But there's a beautiful instance of the resolution of paradox, and it's the Mobius strip. And I don't know if I showed you. I think I probably did, and I don't have it here. I'll do it in another video if you like this. The Mobius strip itself, basically. Okay, so you've got a band, a loop, right? Let's see if I can do a quick one here, just on the fly. I get these ideas on the fly too. So I feel like, okay, it's going here. I'm gonna talk about it, right? So you got a ring. And the thing about a ring is it's got an outside and an inside. And if something's moving around on the outside, it's going to always be on the outside. And if something's moving around on the inside, it's always going to be on the inside, right? So the opposites, never the twain shall meet. And yet all you need is a chiasm, a twist, a crossover point, and you have a non-orientable object, as it's called, a non-orientable topology. And you have then two loops, right? So I can go and trace a path around the outside, and then it goes into the inside, and then back into the outside again. And so one continuous journey will cover both sides of this surface. And so this appears right here. And actually, this is basically what Crowley is saying he's doing when he swaps out the Emperor and the Star in counterchange to the 11 and the Justice and Justice and Strength. I don't think it works that way because, as I have said before, he's swapping shoes to counterchange, to balance out an uneven, got a glove on the right hand, he puts a shoe on the left foot. That, to me, it's not a solution, but it's going somewhere. He wants a mobiality to be, and basically, he wants to impregnate the tarot and the very ontology with mobiality, right? The body and the mind are not separate. They are reached through one another. Heaven and earth are reached through one another. The outside and the inside of Eden are reached through one another. That's brilliant, and I agree with it. And this is the thelema that goes back to Rabelais and back before Rabelais, all the way, I believe, to these ancient, we're going to just say these ancient hidden traditions that did not fall into the trap of the Pythagorean assumption of primordial stasis. And it is a Pythagorean thing. Everything is a ratio. And anyone who talks about rational numbers will get tossed off the boat. And drown. As much as I obviously appreciate Pythagoras. but that interval, the Pythagorean comma, as they call it, I believe, that the little residue, the as Schelling called the indivisible remainder. Schelling's an interesting counterpole to Hegel. Hegel's dialectic, where thesis, antithesis, synthesis, in the synthesis is the thesis of the next term. Well, there was a guy named Schelling who was contemporary of Hegel's, and he was actually like really big, major academic before Hegel. But Hegel, in his later years, just took over. Right, he was just sort of sitting back, biding his time, like a rational dialectic spider, and then he, worked it all out. But Hegel had his boom, and Hegel's a Turnerist, right? He's got the 3 points. He's really Schelling's got the 3 points. It's been a while since I read it, and I didn't read it that carefully because German philosophy isn't really terribly my thing. But I did have a good teacher who conveyed some of these ideas, so I got a sense that basically, there is this tradition, this change primary tradition that's been along for the whole ride, and that Crowley is another example of it. But so was Nietzsche, so was Rabelais. Possibly so was Spinoza, Bergson, certainly, maybe Heraclitus. It's difficult to say, right? Because there's the things that history records, and then there's what are called, one author whose name I forget, lipstick traces, movements that don't leave a written trace. They leave they leave evidence, but they themselves have been erased from history. Like the Cathars or the Albigensian heresy, or the Anabaptists in Munster. Look that up. That's fun. These movements that didn't imprint history with a written record, but have whispered. I think even heliocentrism, basically from Greece to Copernicus, survived through underground transmission. And I can't prove any of it, but I'm in a position to be able to put forth reasonable conjectures, and we'll see. We'll see what eventually surfaces as the narrative. But I think this tradition of denying the idea that being and non-being are starkly opposed, denying Parmenides. I think it's related in some degree to the Mobius strip. It's Zeno's paradoxes, right? Zeno is pointing out Zeno's paradoxes are all instances of how, if you look at things in terms of binaries, dualisms, you actually get these ridiculous paradoxes, right? Change has to be static. So maybe we have to accept that rational dichotomies of yes and no are not at core the whole story. So I leave you with that. Let the lovers bring you back to the Garden of Eden. The other, without collapse, is reassimilated into a whole fabric, requiring an acceptance of paradox. Eden, like love, is a paradox. I am Dr. Peter Duchemin. This is the Force of Life Venus calendar, week 26. Awesome. See you guys.